The frozen landscape of Titan stretched endlessly beneath a sky of swirling orange clouds, its thick nitrogen atmosphere cloaking the moon in perpetual twilight. It was a world that did not forgive weakness. The gravity here was heavier than Earth's, its air unbreathable, its temperatures low enough to freeze flesh in seconds. And yet, within the reinforced citadels buried beneath the ice, humanity's deadliest warriors were born. They were called the Titanborn. Raised in a brutal training regime from the moment they could stand, these warriors knew nothing but discipline, strength, and war. Their bones were denser than steel, their muscles reinforced through genetic optimization and decades of training in high-gravity environments. To the rest of humanity, they were myths, whispers of an elite force that could break entire armies with their bare hands. But for Commander Draven, this was his reality. And war was coming. Draven stood atop a watchtower within Fort Acheron, his piercing gaze fixed on the horizon. Below him, recruits engaged in full-contact combat drills, their strikes echoing like gunfire. The weak had already been culled. Those who remained were the future of the Titanborn. But even the strongest of them would not be ready for what was coming. A cold voice broke through his thoughts. "There'll never be enough," said General Kaler Voss, stepping beside him. Draven didn't look at him. "They'll have to be." Voss was a relic from the old wars, one of the first Titanborn, his face lined with scars that told 1,000 stories of battle. He had seen empires fall and worlds burn, but even he knew that what loomed on the horizon was beyond anything humanity had ever faced. "We've had border skirmishes before," Voss said, exhaling slowly. "Pirates, rogue AI, even those gene-augmented freaks from Europa. But the Xilari..." He shook his head. "This isn't just another war, Draven. This is extinction." Draven finally turned to face him, his expression hard. "Then we make sure humanity doesn't die." Before Voss could reply, the Citadel's alert klaxons blared. A crimson warning light pulsed in the storm-lit sky, sending a ripple of tension through the entire fortress. Draven didn't need to ask what it was. He had been waiting for this moment. "Commander," a voice crackled through his earpiece. "We have incoming. Fast-moving vessels, no IFF tags. They just dropped out of slip space beyond Saturn's orbit." Draven's pulse remained steady, but a storm raged in his mind. "Confirm identification," he ordered. A pause. Then, "Sir, it's them. The Xilari are here." For the first time in history, an alien fleet had entered the Sol system. Draven turned away from Voss and strode toward the command deck without another word. The fortress beneath him roared to life, Titan-born soldiers rushing to their battle stations. Within moments, Fort Acheron was no longer a training ground. It was a war machine, and its weapons were aimed at the void. The first battle of the war had begun. The Xilari did not come with warnings. They came with fire. The attack on Ganymede began at 300 UTC. The colony, humanity's largest outpost beyond Mars, was home to nearly 2 million civilians and the primary military shipyards of the outer system. It was supposed to be untouchable, defended by the best Terran orbital cannons and automated drone fleets. But none of it mattered. Xilari warships, massive biomechanical leviathans, emerged from slip space in perfect formation, their sleek black hulls absorbing every sensor ping sent their way. By the time Ganymede's early warning systems detected them, it was already too late. The aliens fired first. Hundreds of plasma lances erupted from their fleet, spearing through Terran defense platforms with surgical precision. The colony's main station, Helios Prime, was obliterated in the opening salvo, its wreckage tumbling into the thin atmosphere of the moon below. The automated defenses that remained retaliated, sending volleys of railgun slugs into the void. Some found their mark, punching holes in the enemy's hulls, but the Xilari ships didn't slow. They had come to exterminate. Groundside, chaos reigned. Civilians ran through the domed streets of New Titan City, their terrified screams lost beneath the wail of evacuation sirens. Soldiers scrambled to defensive positions as Silari drop pods rained from the sky, burrowing into the colony's infrastructure like parasites. When the pods opened, nightmare creatures spilled out, biomechanical monstrosities with razor limbs and glowing eyes. They cut through humans with terrifying speed, their chitinous armor shrugging off bullets. Within the first 10 minutes, over 70% of Ganymede's defenses were gone, and that was when the Titanborn arrived. Like vengeful gods, they descended from the darkness of space, their stolen UTC warships burning into the upper atmosphere. Commander Rodraven stood at the helm of the Iron Fang, his expression carved from stone. Around him, his warriors braced for battle. The Titanborn did not wait for orders. They did not hesitate. They acted. Hit them hard, Draven growled. Make them bleed. The Iron Fang led the charge, its spinal-mounted railgun firing a tungsten slug at near-relativistic speeds. The round tore through a Xelari warship, splitting it in half. The Titanborn fleet followed, unleashing a coordinated barrage of mass-driver cannons, nuclear-tipped torpedoes, and high-velocity kinetic rounds. The Xelari, caught mid-slaughter, turned to engage. The battle was no longer one-sided. Titanborn drop pods slammed into the war-torn streets, doors blowing open as enhanced soldiers emerged with devastating efficiency. They moved like phantoms, each one a living weapon. Exo-frame gauntlets crushed skulls, arc blades carved through alien flesh. Rodraven himself led the charge, a titan among men, his armor slick with Silari blood as he cut down enemies with brutal precision. Still, the battle was far from won. Above, the Xelari fleet regrouped. Their losses were minimal compared to their overwhelming numbers. For every warbeast the Titanborn felled, another took its place. Draven knew the truth. This wasn't just a raid. This was a test. The Xelari weren't just here to conquer. They were here to see if humanity was worth wiping out. And unless the Titanborn could prove them wrong, the rest of Sol would be next. Ganymede burned. From the bridge of the Iron Fang, Rodraven watched the colony's domed cities collapse, their reinforced steel and titanium structures torn apart by plasma fire and alien monstrosities. The once thriving metropolis of New Titan City was nothing more than a smoldering ruin, its streets littered with bodies, human and Silari alike. The battle had been won, but the cost was staggering. Less than 10% of Ganymede's population had survived. Entire families had been wiped out, their names lost in fire and blood. What remained of the United Terran Coalition's UTC forces were in shambles, their commanders either dead or too shell-shocked to take control. The Xelari had retreated, but only because they had what they wanted. A test. Draven clenched his jaw. The aliens had measured humanity's strength and found it lacking. They hadn't come to conquer. They had come to see how hard humans could fight. And now they knew the truth. Earth's leaders were too weak, its armies too fractured. The next time the Xelari returned, it wouldn't be to test humanity. It would be to exterminate them. His comms crackled to life. "Sir, we have a problem," came the voice of Lieutenant Varric Hale. "The UTC just sent an emergency broadcast. They want us to stand down and return to Titan. No further engagements." Draven let out a slow breath, suppressing his rage. He had expected this. Earth's politicians weren't warriors. They were bureaucrats, terrified of losing power. They saw the Titanborn as a necessary evil, useful in battle, but too dangerous to be left unchecked. Now that the war had escalated beyond their control, they would try to rein the Titanborn in. "They think we can negotiate?" Draven asked, his voice sharp. "Yes, sir," Hale replied. "They believe diplomacy is still possible." Draven turned to face the bridge crew, his piercing gaze sweeping over his soldiers. Every one of them had fought on Ganymede. Every one of them had seen what the Xelari did to those who surrendered. He didn't need to ask their opinion. He already knew. "Open a system-wide broadcast," Draven ordered. Make sure everyone hears this. Earth, Mars, the outer colonies, all of Sol. A brief pause. Then, you're live, Commander. Draven stepped forward, his face illuminated by the soft glow of holographic displays. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of an unbreakable will. "This is Commander Rodraven of the Titanborn," he said. "The UTC has ordered us to stand down, to retreat, to wait while they beg for mercy from an enemy that will give none." He let the words hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "The Xilari did not come to negotiate. They came to slaughter. They butchered our people, burned our cities, and tested our strength. Now they know the truth. Earth will kneel, but Titan will not." The bridge crew stood taller, their eyes burning with conviction. If the UTC wishes to surrender, let them. If Earth's leaders wish to grovel before their new masters, let them. But the Titanborn were not made to kneel. We were made for war. Draven took a step closer to the display, staring directly into the lens. "From this moment forward, the Titanborn answer to no one. We are no longer a branch of the UTC. We are the shield of Sol. If humanity's rulers are too weak to fight for their own survival, then we will fight for them." He turned to his officers. "Cut the feed." The transmission ended, and silence filled the bridge. Then, one by one, the Titanborn slammed their fists to their chests in salute. Draven exhaled slowly. The war for humanity's survival had begun, and the Titanborn would fight it alone. Neptune loomed in the distance, its swirling blue storms casting an eerie glow across the void. The battle had not yet begun, but death already lingered in the silence. Commander Rodraven stood at the command deck of the Iron Fang, staring at the holographic projection of the battlefield. The Xilari Armada had arrived in force, at least 70 warships, each one bristling with biomechanical weaponry, their hulls pulsing with an unnatural living energy. They moved with an eerie grace, like predators closing in on wounded prey. The remains of the UTC's fleet were scattered across the sector, outgunned, outnumbered, and outmaneuvered. Draven could see the fear in the voices of the surviving fleet commanders. They had fought, but like Ganymede, the UTC's forces had been obliterated in minutes. Now the Xilari were closing in for the kill. But the Titanborn had come. Draven turned to his bridge crew, his expression unreadable. "Deploy the fleet," he ordered. "No formations, no standard tactics. We fight the way we were born to fight." The Titanborn fleet surged forward. Unlike the rigid UTC battle formations, Titanborn ships moved unpredictably. Erratic course corrections, sudden velocity shifts, unorthodox attack patterns. They did not fight by the book because the Xilari had already read the book. The first exchange of fire erupted in a storm of destruction. Titanborn warships unleashed devastating railgun barrages, the sheer kinetic force of their projectiles ripping through Xilari hulls like paper. Xilari vessels retaliated with beams of searing plasma, their weapons cutting through human ships in elegant arcs of death. Explosions bloomed in the void as both sides lost ships in a chaotic ballet of fire and ruin. Then the Titanborn unleashed their true strength. Draven's elite warriors launched from their carriers in modified drop pods, hurling themselves through space with reckless precision. The Xilari had not been prepared for this. They had studied Terran fleets, Terran formations, but not Titanborn brutality. Titanborn strike teams boarded the enemy ships mid-battle. Mag boots locked onto alien hulls as Draven's warriors used fusion torches to burn their way inside. The Xilari were used to fighting from a distance, but inside their own ships, they were hunted. Draven himself led the assault on the Xilari command cruiser. His exoframe armor, built for war in high-gravity conditions, made him a monster in the low-G corridors of the alien warship. He moved with terrifying speed, his arc blades carving through Xilari warriors as if they were nothing. The aliens screamed. They had believed humans were prey. They had believed their genetic superiority made them untouchable. But they had never fought Titanborn before. By the time Draven reached the command deck, the auxiliary captain, a towering creature with obsidian armor fused to its flesh, stood waiting. "You are strong," it rasped, its voice a series of clicking tones translated through Draven's helmet. "But you are alone." Draven wiped auxiliary blood from his blade and leveled it at the creature. "Not alone," he growled. "Just the first one through the door." The Titanborn did not just win the battle. They sent a message. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was not prey. The war had only just begun. The auxiliary flagship burned. Its once imposing hull, a black monolith of biomechanical terror, now drifted in the void, scared by railgun impacts and explosions. Its command deck lay in ruins, walls streaked with thick, iridescent alien blood. Roadraven stood over the corpse of the auxiliary captain, his arc blade still humming with residual energy. For the first time in history, humanity had boarded and conquered an enemy warship in open combat. The Titanborn had done the impossible, but there was no time to celebrate. "Commander," Lieutenant Varric Hale's voice crackled over the comms, urgency cutting through the static. "The enemy fleet is regrouping. They're adapting. We need to move." Draven exhaled sharply and turned to his strike team. "We're done here. Back to the Iron Fang." The Titanborn warriors followed without hesitation, their boots thudding against the scorched floors of the auxiliary bridge. They had left devastation in their wake, but even as they withdrew, the ship itself seemed to resist, organic walls convulsing, strange tendrils curling as if the vessel was alive and angry. As they reached their extraction point, the ship screamed. A deep, resonant vibration rippled through its structure, the auxiliary's final act of defiance. Its core had gone critical. "Move," Draven barked. The team launched into space as the flagship detonated, a violet fireball consuming the wreckage. The shockwave sent them tumbling, but their mag thrusters fired in unison, propelling them toward their waiting dropships. As soon as Draven landed aboard the Iron Fang, he ripped off his helmet and strode toward the tactical display. The battle was still raging outside. The auxiliary had lost their leader, but they hadn't broken. If anything, they were fighting harder. Hale gestured at the screen, where enemy formations were shifting. "They're learning from us, Commander. They're adjusting to our tactics." Draven studied the patterns. The auxiliary were no longer holding rigid battle lines. They were mirroring the Titanborn's erratic, unpredictable movements, adapting in real time. "They're not just studying our tactics," Draven said grimly. "They're becoming us." A cold realization settled over the bridge. The auxiliary hadn't sent their best soldiers into this fight. The forces that had hit Ganymede and Neptune were probes, expendable scouts testing humanity's capabilities. The real war hadn't even begun. Draven clenched his fists. He had been raised on Titan to believe that humans were superior because of their adaptability, their will to fight against impossible odds. But what if the auxiliary had that same ability? What if this war wasn't just about survival, but about who could evolve faster? A new kind of war, one fought with more than just weapons. "Commander," a bridge officer called out. "Incoming transmission from the UTC High Command." Draven's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what was coming. "They're ordering us to retreat," Hale muttered bitterly. "They want us to fall back to Earth." Draven turned away from the screen, his mind already made up. "Open a secure channel," he ordered. Seconds later, the faces of UTC's highest-ranking officials flickered to life before him. Their expressions were a mix of fear and frustration. "Commander Draven," Admiral Luffian began, "you are to stand down and withdraw to Earth immediately. This fight is over." Draven stared at them, expression cold. "You're right," he said. "This fight is over." The admirals exchanged relieved glances. Then Draven leaned forward. "But the war has just begun." The screen went dark. The Titanborn had made their choice. They were no longer just soldiers. They were humanity's last hope. The Titanborn did not retreat. As the rest of the UTC fleet limped back toward Earth, Rodraven and his warriors set their sights on a new battleground, Mars. The red planet had long been the jewel of humanity's expansion, second only to Earth itself. It was the industrial heart of the UTC, its shipyards producing the vast majority of the fleet's warships. But its rulers were weak, bureaucrats who thought treaties and diplomacy could shield them from the coming storm. Draven knew better. If Mars remained under UTC control, it would fall without a fight. The politicians would surrender their factories, their defenses, everything, to the Xilari in a desperate attempt at appeasement. Humanity's last war machine would be handed over without a single shot fired. Draven would not allow that to happen. And so, the Titanborn descended upon Mars like a hammer from the heavens. The UTC had expected them. The moment Draven's fleet entered orbit, automated defense platforms spun to life, their railguns locking onto the approaching warships. Mars security forces scrambled, mobilizing squadrons of fighter craft to intercept. A warning was broadcast across all channels. Titanborn forces, you are in violation of UTC war codes. Stand down immediately. Draven's response was swift. Mars belongs to humanity, not cowards. Then the Titanborn attacked. ###. The siege begins. The first wave came as a shock. The Titanborn fleet was outnumbered, but they fought like demons, smashing through the initial blockade with precision strikes. Titanborn pilots, trained in chaotic high-G combat, danced through enemy fire, their gunships weaving between the bulky UTC cruisers. Draven himself led the planetary assault. Drop pods rained down onto Olympus Mons, slamming into the crimson soil with thunderous impact. Titanborn shock troops burst from the wreckage, weapons blazing, cutting down UTC security forces before they could mount a coordinated defense. The capital city, New Alexandria, fell within hours. Politicians and corporate executives tried to flee, but the Titanborn were relentless. Draven personally stormed the UTC command center, dragging the planetary governor from his fortified bunker. "You're making a mistake," the governor spat. "We were negotiating with the Xilari. We could have saved billions." Draven struck him across the face, sending the man sprawling. "No one is coming to save you," he growled. "You tried to surrender the last forge world we have. That makes you worse than useless." He turned to his soldiers. "Take him away." With Mars under Titanborn control, everything changed. For the first time in history, humanity had been divided, not by ideology, but by survival itself. The UTC still controlled Earth, its leaders clinging to the illusion of peace. But the Titanborn now held the factories, the shipyards, the war machines that could actually fight back. From Mars, Draven sent a message to all remaining human colonies. Earth has already lost, but we can still win. Join us, or die on your knees. As the transmission spread across the system, the Xilari watched from the darkness. The Titanborn had not just rebelled. They had declared war on the old world itself. And soon, the true war for humanity. Mars was no longer a colony. It was no longer a jewel of the United Terran Coalition. It was something new, a fortress, a stronghold where humanity's future would be forged in steel and fire. Rodraven stood on the balcony of Olympus Command, overlooking the vast industrial plains that stretched toward the horizon. Titanborn engineers worked day and night, refitting ships, repurposing old mining stations into war foundries, and converting civilian transports into heavily armored gunships. This was no longer a war of survival. It was a war of ascension. Humanity would not just defend itself, it would strike back. Draven turned as Lieutenant Varric Hale approached. "Reports are in," Hale said, handing over a holo tablet. "We've secured the last of the UTC's hidden armories. We now control over 60% of Mars shipyards. Weapons production is ramping up, and our forces are growing by the day." Draven scanned the data. Mars had become a beacon for every soldier, mercenary, and exiled warrior who still had the will to fight. UTC defectors had begun arriving in droves, drawn by the promise of a war worth fighting. Even some of Earth's best officers had abandoned their posts to join the cause. The UTC is panicking, Hale continued. Their leadership is fractured. Half of them want to negotiate with us. The other half want to bomb us into dust. But they won't act. He smirked. They don't have the strength. Draven nodded. Earth's leaders still clung to the belief that the Xelari could be reasoned with. They were too blind, too afraid, to see the truth. The Xelari weren't invaders. They were harvesters. And they were coming. ###, the enemy's next move. As if summoned by his thoughts, alarms blared across the command center. A communications officer turned in his seat, his face pale. "Commander, we've intercepted a signal. It's not from the UTC. It's from the Xelari." Draven stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "Put it through." The holographic display shifted, revealing a towering Xelari warlord. Its chitinous body gleamed under the sickly green light of its command chamber, its elongated skull adorned with ceremonial battle scars. Its eyes, deep pits of burning violet, locked onto Draven. "Titanborn," the creature hissed, its voice a mixture of guttural growls and eerie harmonics. "You are an anomaly." Draven crossed his arms. "Is that what your kind calls a real threat?" The Xelari warlord tilted its head. "Your species was expected to break. Your leaders were expected to kneel. But you have proven useful." A cold fury burned in Draven's chest. "You think we fight for your amusement. You fight because you have no choice." The Xelari leaned closer, its expression unreadable. "But you are still primitive. You are still flawed. And you will fall, like every other race before you." Draven smirked. "We're not like every other race." The warlord let out a clicking sound, something almost like laughter. "Then prove it. We are coming." The transmission cut out. For a long moment, silence hung over the war room. Then Hale spoke. "Commander, we just picked up multiple energy signatures. The Xelari fleet is en route." Draven turned toward the strategic map. The alien fleet was massive. Hundreds of warships, all converging on Mars. The final battle was coming. Draven exhaled slowly, then turned to his officers. "This is what we were made for." His voice was steady, filled with an unshakable resolve. "We are Titanborn. We were forged in the gravity of a dead world, tempered by war, and hardened by loss. The UTC may have forgotten what it means to fight, but we have not." He slammed his fist against the steel table. "The Xelari believe they are the apex predators of this galaxy. They believe we are prey." He met the eyes of every soldier in the room. "Let's remind them what happens when they underestimate humans. ###, the Warborn rise." Across Mars, sirens wailed as warships powered up, their engines burning bright against the cold void. Titanborn warriors suited up, loading weapons and preparing for battle. This would not be another retreat. This would not be another massacre. This was humanity's stand. As the first enemy ships entered the outer system, Draven donned his combat armor and stepped onto the bridge of the Iron Fang. "This is it," Hale said. "The battle that decides everything." Draven's gaze was locked on the incoming fleet, his expression unyielding. "No," he said. "This is just the beginning." The Titanborn were no longer just humanity's defenders. They were its vengeance. And the galaxy was about to learn what it meant to make war with soul. The Xelari fleet arrived in force. Hundreds of warships, sleek and biomechanical, surged into the Martian system like a tidal wave of living death. Their weapons, built to scour civilizations from existence, glowed with eerie, pulsating energy. The void trembled as the first salvo of plasma lances lanced forward, streaking toward the Titanborn stronghold. But Mars did not stand alone. The Titanborn fleet, reinforced by defectors, mercenaries, and the scattered remnants of Earth's finest warriors, rose to meet them. The Iron Fang led the charge, its engines burning bright as it plunged into the storm. Draven stood at the command deck, his eyes locked onto the enemy forces. "This is our line," he growled. "And we hold it." The battle ignited in an instant. Railgun slugs the size of shuttles ripped through celery hulls, sending sprays of alien gore into the void. Titanborn strike teams launched boarding pods at impossible speeds, smashing through organic warships and tearing their way inside. Human ships moved unpredictably, breaking every rule of traditional warfare, because rules meant nothing in a fight for survival. The Xelari retaliated with merciless precision. Their living ships twisted and writhed, adapting to every attack. They unleashed swarms of razor-edged drones, each one a perfect killing machine, designed to slice through armor and flesh alike. But the Titanborn were monsters in their own right. On the battlefield, Draven was a force of nature. His exoframe armor allowed him to tear through Xelari warriors with inhuman speed and strength. His soldiers followed, overwhelming their enemies in brutal close-quarters combat. They weren't just fighting. They were butchering the invaders. ###, the turning point. Despite their ferocity, the Titanborn were still outnumbered. The Xelari kept coming, wave after wave, their losses insignificant against the sheer size of their forces. Hale's voice crackled over the comms. "Draven, the fleet won't last. We need something, anything, to turn the tide." Draven's mind raced. Mars' defenses were holding, but just barely. The orbital shipyards, now repurposed into massive weapons platforms, rained hellfire upon the enemy. Yet it wasn't enough. And then he saw it. The Xelari command ship. A massive leviathan, larger than any vessel humanity had ever faced. It was the heart of the enemy fleet, their hive mind, their tactical core. If they could take it down, they could win. Draven made his decision. "I'm going in." Hale's protest was instant. "Draven, that's suicide." Draven smirked. "That's war." He launched himself into the void, riding a boarding pod toward the heart of the enemy fleet. Behind him, his elite strike team followed, Titanborn warriors bracing for one last, desperate assault. The Xelari command ship loomed before them, a grotesque cathedral of flesh and steel. They smashed through its hull at breakneck speed, bursting into its corridors in a storm of fire and death. Draven fought his way forward, cutting through Xelari warriors like a force of nature. His goal was clear, the ship's neural core. If he could destroy it, he could cripple their entire fleet. He reached the core chamber just as the Xelari warlord appeared before him. "You are persistent," the creature rasped, "but you are nothing." Draven clenched his fists. "That's where you're wrong." Then he detonated his last explosive charge. ###, the Wrath of Saul. The Xelari command ship imploded, its neural core ripping apart in a shockwave of uncontrolled energy. Across the battlefield, Xelari vessels shuddered, their hive minds severed, their coordination shattered. The Titanborn seized the moment. Human warships tore through the disoriented enemy, cutting them down like a pack of starving wolves. What had been an unstoppable invasion turned into a slaughter. The Xelari fled. For the first time in history, the apex predators of the galaxy knew fear. Draven stood amidst the wreckage, bloody but unbowed. The war was not over. The Xelari would return. Earth still needed to be freed. But today, humanity had done the impossible. Today, the Titanborn had conquered the stars. And the galaxy would never be the same again.